Today's program is a presentation of the Proactive Brain Health Alliance. So, this is a collaborative organization. Some of you might be joining from Brian Grant Foundation, from PMD Alliance, but we put together the Proactive Brain Health Alliance because research is uncovering more and more ways to find out who is at risk of neurodegenerative disease. And more researchers, like our expert today, are finding out ways that we can prevent, delay the progression. And the Proactive Brain Health Alliance, we want to empower people to understand maybe you have prodromal symptoms, maybe you have genetic risk, maybe you have a first degree relative. What can you do? Don't get on Google and WebMD and fall down a dark rabbit hole. You can exercise, you can learn, you can be active, you can read the book we're about to learn about today. There's so much to do. So I wanted to set the stage and just say the purpose of our alliance, of the presentation, and welcome all of you. Some of you might be like our guest, might be related to someone with Parkinson's. Some of you might have Parkinson's yourselves and be joining for your family members to learn, and some of you might be at risk or have a gene or some prodromal symptoms. So we're a varied bunch, but what we all have in common is we're here to learn and expand our minds and maybe even laugh a little bit. Usually, Ray can keep us smiling. So. I'm now going to, before I hand over, I'll cover those housekeeping. So Kelly here in the corner is on tech support. So if you have any AV problems, you can't see, you can't type, put it in the chat and we'll do some private troubleshooting. We are recording today's program, so you'll be able to share it out with family members and friends or refer back to it. So sit back, relax, soak it all in, and I will introduce you to who's taken over today. So it's my pleasure to welcome Maliah Grant. She is the daughter of Brian Grant. Any fans, any Trailblazer fans in the audience? Woo woo. And Maliah is actually, she is the boss today. She is going to be grilling Dr. Ray Dorsey, author of the Parkinson's Plan and movement disorder specialist, from her perspective as the relative, as the daughter of someone with young onset Parkinson's, someone maybe who has risk herself. And I just can't wait to hear Maliah's. I think she has a really fresh perspective and whole new generation looking at things today. And us oldies, we've we get our spot, but let's really welcome to be able to hear from Maliah, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, as somebody whose dad has Parkinson's, I think the first question that I would want to ask, which is like the big question, which hopefully will transition into some follow-up questions are, for somebody whose parent was diagnosed at such a young age, how does my risk of developing Parkinson's compare to the general population? And since my dad was diagnosed at a younger age, would that mean that I have a higher chance of being diagnosed at that age as well? Or is there no correlation?
Uh,
Just
so
to
first,
start off.
so first of all, what a great pleasure and treat to be with you, Maliah. Thank you very much for being for all the work that you're doing, that your family has done, and the Brian Grant Foundation has done to make the lives of people with Parkinson's better. Thank you to Andrea and the PMD Alliance and the Proactive Brain Alliance for helping change the course of Parkinson's. So what we know is that first degree relatives, so siblings and children, have about a twice, if they have someone with Parkinson's, have twice the risk of developing Parkinson's disease compared to those with no family history. That's a lot, but not like huge. Said another way is well over 90% of people with a family history of Parkinson's disease will not develop Parkinson's disease in their lifetime. So most people with a family history of disease won't develop it, and most people don't have a family history of disease. Only about 15% of people have a family history of disease. So that's the first thing, that the risk is higher. It's substantially higher, but not astronomically higher. Second is that if your parent had young onset Parkinson's disease, does that mean that if you're going to develop Parkinson's disease, you're going to develop it at a younger age? I'm unaware of any studies that have correlated age of onset for the parent with the age of onset for the children. Dr. Caroline Tanner, who's not here, she would be the one to ask at UC San Francisco. But I think, your father's been really public with why he likely got Parkinson's disease. And so the great news is if you know why you got Parkinson's disease, you can take actions to prevent yourself from not getting it. I'll stop there. Looks
That's
like
true.
you're going to ask me something
That's
else.
true, which is going to lead me to my follow-up. You're beating me to it. So if it's not driven necessarily by genetics, we obviously know there's environmental factors. I was going to ask if there was like an interaction of both, but I feel like we can talk about the environmental factors in a second. But I did want to talk about like the testing and the screening and like diagnosing Parkinson's disease. Is there a single definitive test to diagnose Parkinson's, or is it more of like based off of your symptoms?
So right now in 2025, most of the diagnosis is relied on symptoms. So the
Gotcha.
major symptoms are tremor, slowness in movement, stiffness, and troubles with walking and balance. You need to have two of the four to make the diagnosis. People like
Gotcha.
me get the diagnosis wrong 10 to 20% of the time. So there are new tests that some are available, like right now, skin tests, tests in the spinal fluid primarily for research purposes that are available now to increase the diagnostic accuracy of diagnoses that we clinicians can sometimes get wrong.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. Okay, let's see. I feel like so so since it is based off of symptoms for people who, I mean, actually I'll speak on like personally my family. I feel like my dad, he had access to a lot of doctors. If something was wrong, like he could go and he had like all these tests done. I'm curious to know for people who don't necessarily have the benefit of healthcare and going and actually being able to do all of these tests and speak to somebody, wh what are like, can you reshare like the four, I think you said there
Yeah.
were four things.
So the tremor, usually
Mhm.
asymmetric, usually more on one side than the other, usually in the hands, usually at rest. And I think your father
Mhm.
actually had this, from his book. I think it was in his left hand, for example.
Mhm.
Second is slowness in movement. So I think one of your father's first symptoms is he couldn't jump off his left leg like
Yeah.
he once could.
Mhm.
Third is stiffness. And fourth is difficulties with walking or balance, or in your father's case, jumping and dunking. So, I think he had a lot of these symptoms, and therefore you can make the diagnosis. Now, as you indicate, your father had access to great care at OHSU and other places. It turns out most people, it takes about 2 years from the time they're aware of their symptoms to getting the diagnosis. And sometimes they get the diagnosis wrong. And that's why having objective measures, kind of like a cholesterol level to tell you if you have high cholesterol, or we don't say whether someone has high blood pressure by listening to their heart. We just measure their blood pressure by putting a cup on their arm and measuring it. So having objective measures, whether it's in the skin, the blood, spinal fluid, or imaging, I think will help us identify people with greater accuracy and likely help us identify people earlier in the course of their disease.
Right. Yeah, because I also wanted to talk about, you had mentioned in your book. Now, okay, if this is wrong, you can tell me this is wrong and then correct me, but about by the time somebody is diagnosed with Parkinson's, about 60%, right, of the dopamine producing nerve cells have already died, right?
Yeah.
So what is that like? So that's kind of where my mind goes when we're talking about like the diagnosis and like the timeline. So is that is that meant to kind of speak on like the challenge? stages of the diagnosis almost because
Yes.
yeah.
And
Um,
that we're diagnosing it late. So by the time someone's
mhm,
diagnosed with Parkinson's, the pathology's been there for many years, if not decades. In your
right.
father's case, his likely exposure was when he was 3 years old. So,
Hmm.
because he was born, was a young boy at Camp Lejeune when your grandfather served as a Marine there, and so his disease pathology may have begun as a child, and it took 30 years, 33 years for the pathology to progress to the point that it produced enough symptoms that he noticed it, and that eventually a doctor could make the diagnosis. If you make the diagnosis earlier, if you just like we diagnose high cholesterol before someone gets a heart attack, maybe you can intervene earlier to prevent people from actually developing the symptoms of the disease to identify it. So that's one form of possibly preventing or lowering your risk of the disease.
And then also just to talk about that statistic about the dopamine producing nerve cells. I think something that is one thing that I do know is that's something that my dad definitely that's like one of the stats that he definitely pulls out when we talk about Parkinson's disease. Um, so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, the mental health aspect of having Parkinson's because I also noticed somebody who I believe she was also from Camp Lejeune, she mentioned experiencing like anxiety, brain fog, depression. And I know my dad has also opened up about those same struggles. And so um, I think today and my generation, I feel like there's a conversation being had about how the rates of anxiety and depression are skyrocketing. So I'm wondering if my mind kind of went like, is would that maybe be a like is that something to also look out for? And then like how does that is there like not cross contamination, that's the wrong word, but like is could that be like a mix up also like in the factors of like correlating what you're feeling, like the mental health struggles versus like diagnosing somebody with a disease like Parkinson's, if that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yes. No, it does. So why we pick these four symptoms? Why do we pick tremor, slowness of movement, stiffness, and difficult balance? Well, we picked three of the four because Dr. Parkinson, when he wrote the description of the disease in 1817, was doing it based on his casual observations while walking the streets of London. So he could see a tremor, he could see a shuffling gait, he could see slowness of movement. He couldn't see stiffness, so he actually didn't even describe stiffness. And he couldn't see depression and anxiety. I mean, it's really hard to like just look at someone on the street and go, oh, that person's anxious. I mean, occasionally you can, but it's not so easy. And so that's why we picked those four symptoms. It turns out that those four symptoms are not universal. So like about a 30% of people with Parkinson's don't have tremor. They're not the earliest symptoms of the disease, so loss of smell and constipation, usually one of those conditions precedes it. Depression and anxiety are early features of the disease. If you a neurologist, we what do we do? Neurologists like look at pathology in different parts of the brain, and we say if you get pathology in this particular part of the brain, you get this symptom. So if you have pathology beginning in the nerve that goes to the gut that's responsible for digestion called the vagus nerve, if that nerve is damaged, you get constipation. If you damage the smell centers of the brain, you get loss of smell. If you damage the part of the brain that's responsible for tremor and movement, you get tremor and slowness of movement. But it turns out that the parts of the brain that are damaged in Parkinson's aren't just the centers that are responsible for movement. There are sleep centers that are damaged with Parkinson's, so people act out their dream. There are parts of the brain involved in depression and anxiety, like something called the amygdala and the locus coeruleus, that are damaged in the disease, often early in the course of the disease. And that can lead to people developing depression, anxiety early on or later in the course. Now, depression and anxiety are way more common than Parkinson's disease. And so the number one cause of depression and anxiety is not Parkinson's disease. And, especially for young women like you, Parkinson's would not be high on the list of possible causes. We now know what damage of social media is doing to mental health in teenagers, especially teenage girls. So there are lots and lots of reasons, but yes, depression and anxiety can be an early feature of the disease and can tip someone off, but it has to be in the right clinical context.
Right. I also obviously want to get into like the environmental factors and whatnot. But I also read that Parkinson's is is often described as one of the world's fastest growing neurological diseases or conditions. So why do you think rates are increasing so rapidly? And if I'm wrong and that's not true, you can also say that. But my mind obviously goes to the environmental factors, but I will let you take it away and be the expert.
Your mind is perfect. When Dr. Parkinson described the condition in 1817, he said the condition had not been previously described in the medical literature. He says, I think I'm describing something new. He described 6 individuals with the disease in 1817. In 2017, a study came out estimating that 6 million people had the disease. So you went from a disease that's not classified in the medical literature, affecting 6 individuals on the streets of London among the London fog, to one affecting 6 million worldwide. How do you go from 6 to 6 million? No other brain disease has done that. It was the world's fastest growing brain disease in 2017. So obviously the population has gotten older, but as your father can attest, it's not just affecting older individuals, it's affecting younger individuals. Your father, I think, was 36 when he was diagnosed. So why is it rising? So aging alone can't explain it, and it's rising faster than aging can explain, and it's rising much faster than Alzheimer's disease, for example, which is also tied to aging. Second is genes. Only about 13% of people, Americans with Parkinson's disease, carry a genetic risk factor for the disease. This is based on a great study led by the Parkinson's Foundation called PD Generation. You can participate if you have the disease, offers free genetic testing and genetic counseling. And they looked at 8,000 individuals, and 13% of them carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor. Said another way, 87% of people, including I think your father, do not carry any known genetic cause or genetic risk factor. So the vast majority of Americans with Parkinson's disease have no known genetic cause or genetic risk factor. So the principal causes of the disease do not lie within us. They are not in our cells. They are not in our DNA. They are outside of us in our environment. And so the environmental factors probably begin with air pollution. Dr. Parkinson described the condition in London in 1817 among the London fog. Air quality in 1800 London is equal to what air quality is in Delhi, India today, worse than Beijing, China today, equivalent to what the skies over the Big Apple outside my window turned orange 2 or 3 summers ago when the Canadian wildfires came down. That was 1800 London every day. So air pollution is one big one, likely a major factor for when Dr. Parkinson describes the condition, and a possible explanation why people didn't describe the condition centuries beforehand in any appreciable numbers. And then pesticides, and then many of which are neurotoxins, certain pesticides. And then for your father, this chemical called trichloroethylene, which was used to dry clean clothes and degrease metal, contaminated the marine-based Camp Lejeune where your father lived as a young boy. And it causes cancer. Your grandfather died of esophageal cancer, a link to this chemical, and then your father developed Parkinson's disease, linked to this chemical.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I was also wondering, like the rates. I was going to ask about the rates rising evenly across the world, but I think with the environmental factors too, like obviously different regions are
Yes,
going to have a higher pollution.
So you're exactly right. And so if we're just aging, then Parkinson's disease should just rise with aging. But if we adjust for aging, we do not see a equal rise. Parkinson's disease is much more common in the U.S. and Canada, 5 times more common than it is in less industrialized parts of the world like sub-Saharan Africa. And Parkinson's disease is growing most rapidly in India and China, where countries undergoing the most rapid industrialization and where the environment quality has decayed over the preceding decades. And this is a pattern we do not see for other diseases. No, in general, if you have lower life expectancy, like sub-Saharan Africa, you'd expect more diseases to be present in this. And so here we have the opposite. We have a disease, when adjusted for aging, is less common in areas of the world with lower life expectancy and more common in areas of the world that are wealthier or more industrialized.
Right. Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I feel like people wouldn't, I mean, I guess people who don't really know wouldn't expect something like that, I guess. But yeah, that is really interesting. And it is kind of a testament to the environmental factors that play into this. And then I kind of want to talk about TCE because I do not know how to say the full chemical. So I know it was used for dry cleaning, and there were some other things you mentioned that it was commonly used for in your book. And I think, oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember everything, but it took a certain amount of years, right? For was it TCE or the other chemical to be like either like they stated that it linked to diseases or they banned it. Can you tell me a little bit more
Yeah.
about that? Because I'm blanking
So
a little bit.
So this is the chemical. So water is made up of three atoms,
Hmm.
H2O. Trichloroethylene is made up of a whopping six, two carbons, one hydrogen, and three chlorine atoms. Hence its name tri, which means three. Chloroethylene. It's got a cousin called perchloroethylene. The chemical's been around. This chemical's been around for 100 years. So it's been used since the 1920s. In the 1970s, 2 pounds per American were used. If you used carpet cleaner or gun cleaner, you were exposed to it. If you worked as a mechanic, if you worked in printer or painting, if you drank decaffeinated coffee, you were possibly exposed to it. At the Marine base Camp Lejeune, near the Marine base was a dry cleaner because the officers needed to have their uniforms dry cleaned. Unfortunately, the chemicals used to dry clean the officers' uniforms contaminated the drinking water, leaked from sewer lines or otherwise contaminated the drinking water. So Marines and their families from 1953 to 1987 were drinking this cancer-causing chemical. This chemical is known to cause cancer according to EPA in their water. And because the chemical is volatile, it can evaporate. So this it could be found in the indoor air of the barracks, for example, on the Marine base. And then research done by Dr. Caroline Tanner and Sam Goldman and colleagues showed that Marines who were young, average age was 20 during this time, 34 years later, they had a 70% increased risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Now, Camp Lejeune is just a tip of an iceberg. There are lots and lots and lots of these contaminated sites. I used to live in Rochester, New York. There were four contaminated sites with this chemical within 5 to 10 minutes of where I live in suburban Rochester, New York. We know where all the doctors and lawyers lived. And it turned out one of the sites had level of contamination that was higher than that even found at Camp Lejeune. And I was driving past it for years not knowing about it. And then if people have read or seen the movie A Civil Action, that was the same chemical causing pollution in Woburn, Massachusetts. It's been in Toms River, New Jersey. I see my two great colleagues, Bernard and Denise Coley. It's in Mountain View, California. So it's in lots and lots of places. And in our book, we said because of its widespread use, occupational work exposure, and environmental exposure, that this might be one of the most important causes of Parkinson's disease, at least in the US.
Yeah. Yeah, that that is crazy. But like as far as like banning these kind of chemicals are
Yes.
like why I think it's hard. I think it's a hard question. Like that's kind of like a bad question to ask. Like why are these things even still around? Because
No
they're
one.
used for everything. But like, has there been progress in limiting these types of chemicals? And in your perspective, do you think that we are doing enough to
Well,
prevent future cases like this and preventing like these like to lower the environmental
yeah.
factors?
So some states, New York and Minnesota, have banned trichloroethylene, and California has banned the dry cleaning chemical, which is widely used, perchloroethylene. So three states have taken action. In 2024, the Environmental Protection Agency banned both trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene, calling for a 10-year phase out in almost all uses of it. Some of that ban was initially frozen in 2025. I think more exceptions are being written into the law. I'm not sure of the exact status of it right now, but we if we stop using this chemical, we stop planting the seeds of Parkinson's for future cases. So we make it so that your risk of getting Parkinson's is lower. You obviously didn't live at Camp Lejeune, so I'd imagine that your risk of Parkinson's, because we know what your likely caused your father's Parkinson's, is really not too dissimilar from mine. And if we stop using this chemical, it might get even lower. If we stop using these chemicals that are linked to Parkinson's disease, we can make Parkinson's disease stop rising and start falling. And can I give you an example of this?
Yeah.
So the area of the world where Parkinson's disease appears to be plateauing, especially when you adjust for age, is Western Europe. So Western Europe, many of the nations banned trichloroethylene, stopped using it many years ago. Many of them have stopped using some of the most toxic pesticides, and many have improved their air quality substantially over the last 20, 30, 40 years. It turns out that in the Netherlands, the rates of Parkinson's are either plateauing or falling. In England, adjusted for age, the rates of Parkinson's, the prevalence of Parkinson's, incident number of new cases of Parkinson's is flattening. And in Germany, I think 2 studies now, the incidence of Parkinson's disease is falling. It's falling. So if we get rid of these chemicals, we have evidence that we can create a world where Parkinson's disease is not rising, but falling. What a beautiful thing for your generation, my generation, and everyone here listening to bring about the fall of a disease.
Yeah, and I see in the comments someone said to join the PD Avengers and to write to senators and Congress people and advocate, of course, for banning chemicals and pesticides like these. And I think as somebody who is a child of someone who has this disease, and I am part of the next generation, especially, eventually people my age will be the ones to make these decisions. I think it's really important. And I think that's a good way for us to support and hopefully limit the increase of this disease. So that's definitely something that I would love to start doing. And I think my brother Jaden, he has been vocal about this as well. He is someone that I look up to. He's always advocating for things like this. So thanks for sharing that. Also, I wanted to talk about the Parkinson's 25, of course. Oh my gosh, Jaden just walked downstairs and I said that. Oh, whatever. I want to talk about the Parkinson's 25, sorry. Which are the actions individuals can take that can reduce their risk of Parkinson's, especially important for those who are at genetic risk and people who have a family history of disease like me. You had 25 steps. Obviously, they were phased out in different areas of your life. Like I think you talked about, be cautious of where you put your kids in school and things like that. So not quite yet all of them for me, but things to think about. I think if you had to narrow it down for someone my age who I just graduated college, I don't have much time I don't have much time on my hands to, do everything. But what if you had to narrow it down, what are the top 5 daily habits that you think matter most, especially with my generation and the things that I can be doing on a daily basis to
First,
yeah.
So first of all, kudos on graduation. Your father, I think, says one of the things he's most proud of. He's got 5 children who've all graduated from college. So kudos on that. Second, the Parkinson's
Thanks.
25. If you don't like to read, you can get the book. You can skip to page 237. Michael Oken and I will not be offended if you just go to the Reader's Digest version. And we have the recommendations and nice little color, or no, not color pictures, but nice pictures and very short descriptions. So if I had a father who had Parkinson's disease and I was concerned that he was got it from exposure to trichloroethylene, which it really helps us, then I would want to stay away from trichloroethylene. So how would I stay away from trichloroethylene if I were a young member of the Brian Grant family? So I would use a water filter. So a simple carbon water filter widely available in supermarkets can reduce exposure to pesticides, TCE, trichloroethylene, and other chemicals that may be in your water. These carbon filters can be installed for the whole house or at the point or in like water pitchers. The other one I would be like really for you would be dry clean cautiously. Dry clean clothes release dangerous chemicals like trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene into your car or home. To limit exposure, consider first minimizing your dry cleaning. Second, find a dry cleaner that does not use PCE or called PERC. It's often called green dry cleaners, and you can just ask them, do you use PERC? And if not, good place. And third, if you do dry clean your clothes with a chemical with perchloroethylene, air them out, take the bag off the clothes, put them in your garage or outside before you bring them into the house so that the clothes can breathe and you don't have to breathe in the chemicals. And then maybe one more, I'll give you three, is an air purifier. Um, I, I think with the number of evidence linking air pollution to Parkinson's is rising. The evidence linking air pollution to dementia, including Alzheimer's, is growing astronomically. And I think we're missing out on a chance to address a very preventable risk factor for Parkinson's. You know, we talked about Dr. Parkinson describing Parkinson's among the London fogs. And so an air purifier can reduce your exposure to air pollutions, little small pieces of dirt and soot. And then all of these things is that the seeds of Parkinson's are planted early. And there's no better example than your father, who was just a 3-year-old boy when he was likely exposed. So I think it's really important for people your age, or especially this is a chance, if you don't get exposed to these chemicals, you're setting yourself up for a life free of Parkinson's. You're setting yourself up for a life free of Alzheimer's disease. You're setting yourself up for life free of dementia. What a wonderful thing to do for yourself, and wonderful thing for people who already have the disease to do for their kids and grandkids.
Yeah. And also, oh, Kristen said, what about soaking fresh vegetables and fruits in a wash, such as microdin, for at least 20 minutes? I also wanted to touch on um, your book, which touches on diet and exercise. So to follow up to Kristen's question, do you also want to talk about like the importance of the food that you are eating and washing your fruits and vegetables, and also exercising as well?
So this is the core of the Brian Grant Foundation. Katrina and her team, and probably you and Brian, have been really leading the effort in getting us aware of the importance of exercise and nutrition. So you want to avoid exposure to pesticides in all formats. So what's one way you get exposed to them is in what we eat. So I encourage people to buy organic, and I encourage people to wash their fruits and vegetables, even their organic ones, with water, and then either a vegetable wash, a salt solution, or vinegar. This can help remove the residues of pesticides that are found on 20% of common foods. Now, lots of people say organic is expensive. So why is that? It turns out that the United States has $15 billion of agricultural subsidies a year. 99% of that goes to conventional food that uses pesticides. Only 1% of those subsidies are going to organic produce. So in the book, we say, at a minimum, let's stop subsidizing the use of pesticides. So the two crops that are sprayed with the most paraquat in the United States are corn and soybeans. The two crops that are subsidized with the most money from taxpayers, from everyone here, are corn and soybeans. If we stop subsidizing the use of pesticides, we can make organic produce relatively less expensive and have the cost of conventional food more reflect its burden. And then second is organic produce is cheap compared to the cost of Parkinson's disease. So the economic burden of Parkinson's disease is $50,000 per person per year. Your father likely had to retire earlier than he otherwise would have had to retire because of Parkinson's disease. If you look at his statistics, they went down pretty precipitously, I think in large part because he had early features of Parkinson's disease. When he talks about this in his great autobiography, like on the Lakers, he couldn't jump as well as he could, and he had a tremor. I mean, and your father, I think, is probably the only person to ever play a professional NBA basketball with Parkinson's disease, and that's how good he was. He was still playing with Parkinson's disease. So I think there's a huge economic cost that we're not reflecting in the price of pesticides that are being used on food, and we need to stop subsidizing these pesticides. If we're going to subsidize crops, let's subsidize regenerative agriculture that's done without pesticides.
Yeah. And also, I also didn't even think about the financial cost of living with Parkinson's disease as well, which is, like you said, the cost of both. One is higher than the other.
Oh, it's like not even close, right? I mean, just look at your father. I mean, like, if he played two more NBA seasons, right, or one more contract or whatever, and he's young. And there were lots of people who had to give up their careers at various stages of their life. Michael J. Fox, I mean, and the list goes on, Richard Clifford. And not to say that people can't live incredibly productive lives with the disease. Brian Grant being an example, Michael J. Fox, I think 4 or 5 books, 2 or 3 TV shows. Richard Clifford walked in space with Parkinson's disease. We've had senators and Congress, members of Congress serve with Parkinson's disease. We've had an attorney general with Parkinson's disease. We had a pope with a Parkinsonian disorder. So lots of things to do, but there's a huge economic cost to the disease for the person and their family.
And one of my last questions, actually not my last one, but one of them is, I know that the Parkinson's 25 focuses on reducing risk, but you said my dad was probably exposed at 3 years old. So how do these same lifestyle habits benefit people who are already living with the disease? And had he known, I think at 3 years old, you probably can't make these decisions, but how do you think that the progression would have, if he had read your book at 5 years old and followed those steps, how would that play out to now? And also, for people who are already diagnosed with the disease, this isn't just for people who are trying to reduce their risk of getting it. How does that do these lifestyle habits benefit those who are already living with the disease?
That's fantastic. So if you're diagnosed with high blood pressure or you're diagnosed with diabetes, what's the first thing the doctor's going to tell you to do? Reduce your salt intake or exercise. So if chronic conditions like that are modifiable, why isn't Parkinson's disease modifiable? And I think it is. And we know that there are people who have faster rates of progression and slower rates of progression. I think one of the reasons why is some people have stopped being exposed to the chemicals, like your father, and some people are still being exposed to the chemicals. They're still living near a farm that's spraying pesticides. They're still drinking well water that's contaminated with pesticides, for example. And it's not just my belief that we have evidence of this. Some researchers from UCLA, Beata Ritz, and her colleagues have shown that among people who already have Parkinson's disease, who are subsequently exposed to pesticides, have a faster rate of progression on just about every domain that they measure. 2 other studies, among individuals who already have Parkinson's disease who are exposed to high levels of air pollution, have an increased risk for being hospitalized for their Parkinson's disease, suggesting that high levels of air pollution for people who already have the disease is associated with a greater rate of progression of it. So I think if you're among the 1.2 million Americans like your father with Parkinson's disease, stop being exposed to the pesticides. If you have high blood pressure, stop eating salty foods. If you're a smoker and you have lung cancer, stop smoking. And I don't want to blame people. This is not blame. This is the exposure your father had was involuntary, and without his knowledge, right? He didn't have to give his knowledge or his consent to do it. But now if you have knowledge, you can take actions to reduce your exposure to these chemicals and slow it. The other thing is, so what about your father? He reads the book at age 5. Could he have done something differently? I think the answer is probably. So I'll give you an example. If you're 40 years old and you've been smoking since you were 20, you might be concerned that you're going to get lung cancer at age 50. So is there an incentive for you to stop smoking today? So if you're 40 and you stop smoking your last cigarette today, within seconds, your heart rate normalizes. Within hours, the level of carbon monoxide in your blood decreases. Within months of smoking your last cigarette, your cough and shortness of breath decrease. Within a year, your risk of heart disease has decreased. Within 10 years, your risk of lung cancer is halved. So if you grew up on Camp Lejeune, if you're a Marine who served at Camp Lejeune, if you grew up with well water, if you grew up near a farm or a golf course, I think the 25 recommendations that we have in this book, the Live Well program of the Brian Grant Foundation, these recommendations around nutrition and exercise are even of greater importance. It's quite possible, for example, your father could have developed Parkinson's at an earlier age. Maybe he did read the book at age 5 and he exercised, and he might have developed the Parkinson's at an earlier age of onset or had a more progressive course. And I had the great pleasure to see you and your father opening night for the NBA, and he's doing much better than he has been in the past, and he's improving his health. So there are lots and lots of things that people can do. And there are lots of people, probably some people listening here, who are in better physical shape today with their Parkinson's disease than they were before they had Parkinson's because they're such avid exercisers. And we've seen Jimmy Troy, we've seen Sarah Whittingham, we've seen people do all types of athletic feats after they have Parkinson's disease. And I think they're able to modify their course.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And also, I've been home for I don't even know how long I've been home for, but before when this was supposed to happen prior, I was going to ask what are some things that I should be doing with my dad over the holidays, but I think it's really just moving our bodies and eating healthier and just encouraging him to get outside and move his body a little bit, but he's a very busy man. I think my last question, which I'm sure we've touched on, but just to kind of close it out on my end, I think if your generation or his generation could have done one thing differently to prevent Parkinson's, what would it be? And what do you hope that my generation and future generations do that maybe the older generation didn't? And yeah, like if there's just like one thing. Also, I won't limit you to one thing, but
That's all right. So your father and I were born one day apart, 30 miles apart, outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. So we're the same generation.
Wow.
I think if we recognize that diseases have causes and we take actions, if we identify the causes of diseases, we can take action to prevent it. That's at a macro level. The most tangible thing that I would love to do with your father is to have prevented exposure to trichloroethylene. It's been around for 100 years. It's caused cancer for 100 years. For 100 years, we've allowed a cancer-causing chemical to cause cancer for untold thousands, perhaps millions of Americans and people around the world. So I think getting rid of trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene, we can find, and their companies advertise safer alternatives for degreasing metal, and we can have the price of dry cleaning your clothes should not be Parkinson's disease. I think for your generation is better positioned because telling someone like you that there are chemicals in our environment that have adverse health consequences, you would say that's obvious. I think your generation is much more attuned to the adverse consequences of dirty water, dirty food, and dirty air. And I think your generation will be the generation that helps catalyze us getting rid of diseases. Diseases are not permanent fixtures of humanity. Early humans died from a lot of famine, and we've addressed famine in the vast majority of the world. Next epic of people who died from infectious diseases, typhus, smallpox, polio. These are all things that we largely read about in history books. They are not largely present in modern society. Our society is dying from degenerative and man-made diseases, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, ALS, brain cancer, intellectual disabilities. If we clean up our food, water, and air, and your generation is extraordinarily well positioned to do that, then we create a world without these diseases. And what a gift to future generations, what a gift to your future self, than to create a world where you and your friends are free of a world of Parkinson's disease.
Well, I think I'm questioned out. I can do Katrina's laughing. But yeah, this has been very, very, very insightful. Thank you so much for sitting down and answering all my questions, even if they may have been a little repetitive. Um, but I just want to open up the conversation to anybody else. And if you guys have any questions that you want to ask, feel free to drop it in the chat and I can ask them for you. I don't know if there's a way to unmute, whichever works best, but just wanted to open up the conversation to everyone who took the time to participate and join. Oh, we have somebody raise their hand. R. Bernard. How do I? Oh, perfect. Okay, I'll mute.
All right. So first, I want to thank you, Maliah, for not only participating in this, but giving us a view from, they used to call it view from the top, but like view from your level. Okay. So I have one question for you. Okay. You were motivated in asking a lot of these questions because of your dad. How do we reach your peers? How do we reach your colleagues? What's the best way for us to get there? Because your generation represents a lot more than you may give it credit for. Okay. You mentioned that, one day you'll be making the decisions. I hope that day is a lot sooner than one day. So how do we reach what's the best way to reach your colleagues and give them this information beyond only if they have a relative that has Parkinson's disease?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's important for one. Okay, I don't know how to frame this because I feel like it's hard. I think a lot of the times, unfortunately, people care about an issue when they're directly impacted. So, like you said, not a lot of people might have a direct family member who has Parkinson's disease, but I think one, I know this is probably like such a basic answer, but social media is where a lot of us stay and live. And so I think having those who are affected or not affected, but the people who do have that personal connection, I think it's important for us to take the time to advocate for those who have Parkinson's. So I think me doing my part, my family members doing their part, I think advocacy is the biggest thing for those who are affected. But I think, yeah, social media is a big thing. And I think just like I'm always drawn to people like to understand a little bit more about their lives and like I don't know, I would say social media, honestly, whether that is like maybe doing like a daily, not daily, but like a video where, you can kind of go behind the scenes and get to know somebody's story and someone's family. I think that has a really big impact. But I also just think that for those who can and like have a voice, I think it's important that we do our part to advocate for you guys and get people like my generation, my peers, kind of more in tune to it instead of this just being something that's like, oh, I don't really know about this because I'm not really affected kind of situation. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I hope you're volunteering because I will reach out to you for just that.
Yeah. Yes. I'm here. I'm ready. I also have a huge family too, so we're all down. It's all of us. There's a lot of us.
Thank you.
There's a lot of us. Yeah, of course. Should I read the comments? Um, oh, do you want to, somebody said, oh, okay, question. Is vaping linked to Parkinson's disease at all? I actually was going to ask that and then I forgot. So that's great.
So it turns out that smoking is associated with a decreased risk of Parkinson's disease, and this has been found time and time again. We're not sure what within cigarette smoke might be responsible. Nicotine has been studied in clinical trials, not shown to be helpful. One of my colleagues, Dr. Michael Schwarzschild, thinks that there could be chemicals within cigarette smoke that slow the breakdown of dopamine that could be contributing to it. Obviously, no one's going to smoke to reduce their risk of Parkinson's disease because the health consequences of smoking are horrific. I've seen nothing on vaping. It would be too early to tell because it takes decades for the disease to unfold.
Wow, I was not expecting you to say decreased.
All right, yeah,
It's
it's not our
No, we're
central
not gonna
message,
say that.
Maliah. We're
No, no, no.
just that's
No,
just between you and me, Maliah. Just
we're
between you and me.
we're just not even gonna mention that to my generation at all. We're just not gonna mention that. But yeah, that's very interesting. Um, Anybody else have, oh, sorry guys, I'm a slow reader. Um, do you feel there are any needs that at-risk people have that are different than people with Parkinson's? Can be of service.
I think
Guys,
they
this
were
is
asking
getting,
you the question. That was
yeah.
for you.
Wait, can someone ask? Think I need to hear it out loud to
So
like be
I'll
able
read
to
it for
answer
you.
it.
Malaya,
Okay.
do you feel that there are any needs that at-risk people like you have that are different than people who already have the disease? I'm wondering if how the Parkinson's community can be of service to individuals who are at higher risk, for example, children of people affected by the disease.
I mean, I think that any needs? I mean, I think just again, just hearing people's stories and like the realities of living with the disease is important because I think that will actually make people think about it. Like I genuinely, unfortunately, it's a lot of like you people don't tend I don't want to speak for an entire like an entire generation, but like I think a lot of times like people don't put as much thought into things because they are not affected, but then when they are, then it's like almost like we have the privilege to live our life, like to prevent something. So I think just like sharing your experiences and your realities would be like a resource just to get like at least for me like hearing people's experiences like it I don't want to say like oh this is real but it opens your eyes a little bit more and it makes you want to make the changes to prevent that. So I think just sharing your experience.
Um,
Uh,
Malaya, can I do one of these questions?
yeah.
So Mary Allen asks, if the main cause of Parkinson's is environmental, not genetic, why are those with a family history have twice the risk of developing the disease? So three reasons, possible reasons. One, 13% of people carry a known genetic cause or genetic risk factor, so those can be passed on. So LRRK2 is a mutation in a gene called LRRK2. If you carry that genetic mutation, you have a 30 to 40% chance of developing the disease. Each of your children have a 50% chance of inheriting that genetic mutation. Second, there are genetic factors that aren't widely identified that likely play a role in the disease. So just like Malaya and I might differ in our breakdown of medications, the way we break down medications, we might have genetic differences in the way we break down pesticides. Malaya might be really good at breaking down pesticides and therefore be less prone to its toxic effects than someone like me who might be slow at breaking down. And we actually know from gene environment studies that some individuals who have certain differences in their genes that are responsible for breaking down chemicals like paraquat have a high risk of developing disease if they're exposed. So one is they carry some genetic causes or risk factors. Two, they might have genetic differences in the way we break down these chemicals. And third is families don't just share genes, they share environment. So in our books, we detailed families, generations of farmers who've had multiple members of generations of farmers developing Parkinson's disease. In some of those cases, they don't carry any known genetic cause or risk factor, but they are all being exposed to the same environment, the same sort of pesticides that are being sprayed or in their well water. So the reasons for why family members might be at higher risk is one, there are genetic factors that contribute for about 13% of Americans. Two, there can be other genetic differences in the way we break down these chemicals that need to be studied further. And three, families don't just share genes, they share environment. Maliah, I'll let you take
Oh yeah,
over.
no. I think no. I think you should take over because I think there's a few remaining questions in the chat. Let me look.
So
Um,
one's about organic. Do you see
yeah.
this one from
Yeah, we can
Kristen?
start there.
So how can we be sure that we're eating organic? That's so several studies have found just in general, in general, that I think the word conventional, there's nothing conventional about pesticide use. For the vast majority of history, we've been feeding ourselves without pesticides. But conventional produce generally has higher levels of pesticides than organic. But organic produce can have pesticides on it, begs the question why, and in some cases can have unsafe levels. And that's why our first recommendation, the Parkinson's 25, is to wash your produce, even your organic ones, with water and either a vegetable wash to get rid of fat-loving pesticides or salt solutions or vinegar.
I'm trying to think. I don't see any more, unless there's something that I'm missing. I think we answered all of them. Um,
There's one about Stacy asked, my mom had Parkinson's late in her life. She was diagnosed at 61, completely different presentations, and she carries the LRRK2 gene. How worried should I be about my kids? Um, yeah. So thank you for sharing your story. So LRRK2 is the most common genetic cause of Parkinson's disease. People who carry the most common genetic mutation have about a 30 to 40% risk of developing Parkinson's over their lifetime. The estimates vary. We know that for other genetic diseases, I spent the first 10 years of my life working on Huntington's disease, which is a purely genetic disorder, that even identical twins who carry the genetic mutation responsible for Huntington's disease can have variable progressions in terms of when they develop the disease and what symptoms they have. Some will have more depression, anxiety, some will have more involuntary movements. So people can have variability in their presentation. Now, how concerned should I be about my kids and what should I do? The short answer is you should be concerned about your kids. If once they become adults, they can determine whether they want to have genetic testing done. That should be done with a genetic counselor. PD Generation does that for people with the disease, and you can see a genetic counselor because when you do genetic testing, it has consequences not just for you, but for your family and for your future. So you want to think about that. And then I think if you have carried genetic risk factor, you really need to be concerned about exposure to these chemicals. There have to be factors that explain why only 30 to 40% of people who carry the LRRK2 mutation develop the disease and why some do not. And I think some of those factors are in our environment. There's another genetic risk factor called GBA, and we know that that genetic risk factor has interactions with pesticides. So I think it's especially important for your children and other members of your family to avoid exposure to these toxicants, including trichloroethylene, which mimics the effects of LRRK2 mutations in the lab. It turns out in many cases, these environmental causes, when you study in the lab, they mimic the effects that genetic mutations or genetic causes have in the lab. They produce similar biological effects.
Well, thank you to both. I see that we've come to the end of our hour and just want to say thank you. Ray, you're so good at being grilled now, no matter who the interviewer is. And Malia, you had such good questions. My favorite was, so if we know it's bad, why are we still using this stuff? And that's that like common sense that, I think is going to tell the story and maybe get younger generations involved. Great tip to, use social media to our advantage. So just wanted to say thank you for being here, for all of you, for asking great questions, for listening, and Ray, I loved your comments about ending it. I mean that really leaves me with a sense of hope. So thank you for writing this book and for all you do, and we're all in it together.
And thanks to Maliah. Well, I mean, what a great spokesperson. What a great representative of Generation Z. What a fantastic college graduate. What an amazing family. What a gift to the Parkinson's community to have people like Maliah speaking out and dedicating time, energy, and not being intimidated and asking tough questions, highly informed. What a delight. One of my favorite interviews at all in this entire listening tour. So thank you very much, Maliah.
No, thank you. Thanks for answering all my questions. I was like, how are
Um,
you remembering all this? Oh my gosh. Wow.
well, we hope to see all of you online soon. Until then, everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, everyone.